Chapter 11, Episode 4. Good evening, Mr. Prescott. Good evening, King David. Are you busy? King David had a little chuckle. You good man, Mr. Prescott. All time is good time to visit. Anything new in the park these days? We do okay. How about your world? Looking better all the time. When you say, I do. The world is driven by some great minds these days. People are working on rockets to go to Mars. Pretty exciting world we're in. Crazy thing. It's a new space race, the next level. Technology has changed the playing field. That'd be big news. Will you smoke a cigar with me, King David? No real reason. Seemed it was time to celebrate a pleasant evening. I support what you say, Mr. Prescott. Neither had a bottle of Scotch to pull out. Most Anthropophagi preferred street runoff to alcohol. Fine cigar, Mr. Prescott. Ain't had one so fine long time. They sat for half an hour without talking, puffing slowly and humming faintly the odd time. They watched the nightlife in the city lights. What do you do in the winter, King David? I go California or Florida. Prescott looked at King David. I was king. Papa was king. They both nodded and looked in the evening air and watched the people that strolled by. King David knew many by the way they moved. He could also tell by the way they moved what they were up to. Most were just enjoying fresh, well, almost fresh, air amongst the trees. Some did some drugs or smoked a joint, but he knew the four guys jumping about and attempting to intimidate any who might think to get too near their moving domain could be trouble. They were of a different type. They didn't come to the park to relax or play, the traditional concept behind parks. They were looking for encounters of conflict and destruction. They were showing one another how tough they were, like schoolboys in the playground might the first week of a school year. Some trouble be coming. Not the cops. They keep walking. Them skinhead be visiting. They aren't your subjects. Street folk, not park folk. You don't imagine they will be open to protocol. King David looked at Prescott. He wasn't certain he qualified as black. Certainly not white. All of which was of no importance except for the situation at hand. We are not white folk. Is this the problem we face? That be it. King David nodded. They gonna have knives, Mr. Prescott. These ones that type. Scared and jumpy. I am prepared to act if protocol fails. Should it go so far, do you have subjects that could use some fresh meat? I couldn't eat more than a small chunk of heart. Yes, they'd be close to know we's here talking. Closer when they hear their king being threatened. Won't help none. They not so fit. But for the eating, they help. Nice to know one isn't wasting meat. It's becoming a serious issue these days. I've invested some in fake meat. You ever hear of that? No. The scientists are growing meat in the lab without the animal. The 4 footmen of their own apocalypse had spotted the 2 men in the shadow. Look, 2 niggas in the dock. Evening, boys, you lost? Fuck you, boy, me boy. What you doing in my park? My park. You a street boy. You best go home. You's a nigga and you can go fuck off. We want to sit here. The leader of the tribe was talking at King David. King David nodded slightly to indicate that he had heard the decree. He didn't care to contemplate it. Who gonna run, not gonna die. Listen to big old nigga, he think he's scary. They had taken notice. There had been a pause in the talking of the crazy old bugger who thought he was king of a bench. He hadn't been overly polite. He hadn't taken their threat seriously. The other almost invisible man had said nothing. He almost faded into the shadow. You ain't a proper nigga, what you? I am your nemesis. You my what the fuck? You don't look at me like that. Give us your booze. Where you 2 shits hide your booze? No booze. I'll cut you and your nigger friend And you, China boy, you don't give us your booze. I cut you both, and maybe we don't like you when we piss on you too. Where the booze? We ain't fucking with you. Give us what you got before we fuck you up bad. Run away and stop bothering people, or I will rip your heart out and eat it before you're dead. What you say, China boy? You threaten me? No one threatens me. You have crossed over into a world you don't want to believe exists. King David and Prescott stood up. It was time. They were both big and strong, bigger than what they appeared sitting in the dark on a bench. The boys started to notice, but did not quite register that they had annoyed two big bad motherfuckers about to do some bonding and a mutual kill. The boys had their knives out and ready to use. Ideally, the knives increased the little street tribe's threat level so that the ancient territory standoff could come to its intended conclusion. But they weren't trained killers. They seldom cut anyone mortally. They preferred giving a shit kicking. It was a sport. Kick a drunk. A game everyone won, not including the drunk. That was the extent of their fighting skills. They didn't have 1,000 kills under their belts. They didn't know how terrified they already were. They had crossed the invisible magical line from city park to horror nightmare. They had chanced into niggas in Central Park that weren't responding like homeless bums were expected to respond. They had trodden well over the outside boundary of social animals out for some fun and deep into none of their business. The only way out appeared to be through, so they did it. They attacked, maybe not with intent to kill, but their knives were swinging to cut. King David incapacitated the first attacker with one elegant, quick move. He directed a wild swing of the attacker back at the attacker. He stabbed himself in the stomach. King David helped him drive the knife deep before he threw the dying young man into the bush, where he would be grabbed up by what he might think were old men and women. Mad creatures they were. They ripped off his clothes as they dragged him to a place of near darkness. They ate him to death. He realized his old fear. It fixed in his mind, and no other thoughts could penetrate. The vivid concept didn't last long. His increased heart rate sped up his bleeding. Prescott wanted to take his time with the bigger guy. He had made him a promise that he intended to keep. Prescott broke the attacker's knife hand and punched him in the stomach hard enough to knock out his breath. He staggered, bent over, struggling to breathe. King David had put the third guy on the ground with a throat punch after breaking his knife arm. The fourth stood stunned. He had waited for access to attack. He had been reluctant to swing a knife at a person with intent to cut. Seeing the sudden change in the confrontation, he didn't know what to do. They hadn't been over this possibility. Change your mind, what boy? Run away, don't come back. He nodded. That contract was signed and sealed. He lowered his knife and put it away. It was of no use. My friends, they stay. Go now. King David stepped toward the frightened boy. He turned and ran. Wonder what story he gonna tell. Don't fuck with old niggas in the park. King David nodded. He liked that. Good story. It would be better if it became more general. Don't fuck with people. Be enough. Do we have somewhere more private? Follow me, Mr. Prescott. I show you best place. King David and Prescott took the two nasty boys into the darkness, near the lake. Not a real clean lake, but in the early hours of the morning it was pleasant. Lights reflected off the calm surface. There was enough light to see. King David held the one attacker up in a tight chokehold. Breathing was easier if the boy stood on his toes. The difficult occupation distracted him from his terror. King David was decided to let Prescott take the lead. It had been his agreement with the tribe leader. Prescott took off his coat and shirt. He laid them over a branch and resisted the urge to adjust his tie, a reflex for attend to business. You can do what you say, Mr. Prescott. I can. I don't practice as much now with Sarah. How's she? She's a strong girl. She'll get it. Ain't never done it myself. It's hardly a necessary talent. One of my ancestors, I couldn't tell you how far back, not the Aztecs, he made it a family tradition. The test of power, accuracy, and speed. Hard training is a family tradition. Do you need me to hold him? No, hold your new friend. Let him watch. Maybe we can teach him something. New for me too. Ready, my friend? Prescott lifted his catch and leaned it against a tree and balanced it there. Then he looked at the boy in King David's hold. He showed no malice, just gentle contact. I think he's talking to you. What? I ask you be ready to see your friend. No. Think he's ready, Mr. Prescott. No. Keep your eyes open. You will likely only see this once. Prescott watched the boy. He could see the boy giving in to trust. He would do what Prescott told him to do. The young man could hope that Prescott had it in him to not kill him. There had to be a possibility. He was talking to him. What's your name, son? Rat. Okay, Rat. I want you to watch. King David held his young man so that he could have a good view. He put his hand over the top of Ra's shaved head and held it so that point of view was clearly directed. We's ready, boss. Ra, Prescott smiled before turning to being serious. Attention. The key to a task was to pay attention to the task and nothing else. He steadied the tribe leader up against a tree. Prescott waited to get his attention. The leader tried to pay attention. He had many things go through his underworked brain since his life had taken a surprising turn. Stand steady now. We must be very quiet. The man stood very steady. He was still in a daze from a broken arm and he still had trouble breathing. Breathing hurt. He tried to calm his breathing. He focused enough to see the look in the eyes of what appeared at first to be a human become an anthropophagus. He saw a beast. There was no other way to classify the obsessed creature that was watching him. It was a creature he knew only instinctively. He was frightened to the point of immobilizing terror. He couldn't even form the thought of how to control his panic. He could only stare into the eyes of the beast. Prescott moved so fast that everyone jumped a little. He had been looking at his victim calmly. He took time to reach a trance state. Without complete control of his movements, he could break his fingers. Ribs cracked when he punched through the sternum. He felt the bone snap and slowed his movement to a stop. He took more than a second to pull back enough to open his fist and push it in against the heart to get a piercing hold on it. He pulled the heart out slow enough to take care not to cut his hand or wrist on the broken bones. He held it up to his face. He was before the face of his close to brain dead victim. Prescott took a bite out of the boy's heart. The dying youth couldn't make the connection to why he wasn't really surprised. Somehow it made sense. He saw it. Very impressive, Mr. Prescott. You one scary man. Prescott looked at the young man King David was holding up. His eyes were frozen in a state of shock. He had forgotten to breathe. You can do it again? Not tonight. It isn't as easy as it looks. Not supposing it is. Never seen or heard of it. Ra let out his breath and gasped. He saw the heart get ripped out of his friend. He could see the heart. It was there. His friend was dead. He saw it happen. He made a sound, but it wasn't a word. Prescott took another bite and handed the heart to King David. Not an official bonding ritual, not so usual for an anthropophagus at all. Thank you. My pleasure.